Okay, welcome to this A-level anthology ethics piece on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics from Book 2. This is section 7 from that book, and we'll read it and then we'll analyse it. So he says, "But through our present account is of this nature, we must give what we can. First then, let us consider this, that it is the nature of things to be destroyed by defect and excess, as we can see in the case of strength and health. For to gain light on things imperceptible, we must use evidence of sensible things. Exercise, either excessive or defective, destroys the strength, and similarly drink or food, which is above or below a certain amount, destroys the health, while that which is proportionate both produces and increases and preserves it." So let's look at this. What's going on here? Well, before we get to that little letter, that little phrase first, we need to come and think what comes before that. When Aristotle uses this phrase here, which means we must consider what is of help we can, what does he mean by help? Well, Aristotle is reminding us that we aren't making this inquiry into happiness, into goodness. Just to think about it, it's meant to help us become good. It's a practical guide. This is no armchair philosophy. This is a practical guide to becoming a good person. And becoming good means that we have to act in ways that are just and worthy. He wants us to talk about actions relevant to us. Let's continue. What does Aristotle think is the threat to developing virtue? Developing virtue. Well, as he reads on, he says, "First, then, let us consider this, that it is the nature of such things to be destroyed by excess and defect. Too much or too little of anything is not a good thing." And I think he has a point. This is a fairly strong, intuitive, forceful, and existential experience that we all have. And he's going to make a very real and straightforward analogy shortly. So what's next? What does Aristotle think determines our character? Well, let's read on. He says, as we see in the case of strength and of health, for to gain light on imperceptible things, we must use the evidence of sensible things. And then exercise, either excessive or defective, destroys the strength, and similarly drink or food. What determines our character? Well, remember, our actions determine our character, our characteristics, the things that we practice, the things that we exercise is what determines. So the things that we practice determines what we become. What else? What does Aristotle think he is describing in this phrase by gaining light? As we read this, we see in strength and health and of things to gain light on things imperceptible, we must use the evidence of sensible things. So he's introducing us to the idea that there, with correct reason, which is sometimes called right reason. Remember, Aquinas calls this the recto ratia, right reason. The Stoics would call it right reason. This is not his term. When we use right reason, Aristotle promises more when we use right reason, and he comes back to this again and again, the use of right reason. He's confident in our capacity to think things through. We must use our reason to think about imperceptible and difficult things, to use and begin with evidence of sensible things to talk about the difficult things. Now he's doing something important there. He's disagreeing with his mentor Plato, and again we'll come back to that. He's concentrating on the particulars of ethics rather than the universals and the transcendent aspect of ethics. So he explains that all virtues either thrive or die by excesses and deficiencies. He comes back to this: excessive or deficient, defective destroys the strength. And he's repeating this a little bit. The excess, and he said it earlier, destroyed by defect or a lack of it, and excess. Twice he said this, he's repeating himself. And what he gives us is an analogy, a very important analogy, that explains his thinking. And similarly, drink and food. There's his analogy. It seems fairly straightforward, doesn't it? That too much food, too little food, and we will not be healthy. We will be ill health. And this is an analogy, an example. It's a very important example for him, because he thinks everything's from the ground up, and that's a nice argument, from the physical body to the character of who we are. So it's an analog, an analogy to virtue and vice. It's a deeper analogy, a more specific analogy, as we said, to this critique of Plato, that morality is to be found in the particulars, not in the sort of transcendent universals of Plato. So if you want a grounding for understanding ethics, he says, look at what happens in the physical body, and then it will emerge from that as an example of the basis of morality. So what might be good to do at this point is to draw the diagram we used in lesson to explain the golden mean, the doctrine of the mean, the moderate way between the excess and the defect, between too much of it, too little of it, between the vices of excess and the vices of deficiency. And here it is, but you will have come across this before. And mine's coloured in now because of my highlights, but you can look back in your notes and make sure these are the 12 virtues and their attendant vices of excess and deficiency you find in Aristotle. So this is section 7, and there's been quite a lot of good vocabulary there. You could look at all of this language of the virtues and of the vices of excess and deficiency. Would be particularly good vocab to make a note of and understand in this section.